Hi guys, today we are creating some really fun pieces using some of the ice resin bezels, some of the ice resin in the plunger, and then we're also going to incorporate some of the images from the image pack that is available, and either some of the opals or some of the glitter. I've got two of these. I'm not quite sure which one I want to use just yet, but we will figure it out as we go along. So one of the first things that you want to do after you've decided which bezels it is that you're going to use, you want to go ahead and mix up your resin. And I went ahead and put mine into a little cup here. This is just a throwaway cup. I mixed it up with a plastic stir stick, and it says that you want to mix it for 2 minutes, and then you want to let it sit for about 5 minutes so that all of the bubbles will raise to the top, and then they're going to pop. You want to be really gentle with this because the more you move it, this is the plunger that it actually came in, and I went ahead and used all of what was in the plungers. It's evenly mixed. So you've got part A and part B. You just squeeze it down into your cup or whatever it is you're going to mix into, and then you're going to stir it up. You don't have to use all of it. You can close this back up if you only use part of it and then sit it to the side, but I wasn't sure how much I was going to use. So I went ahead and poured all of mine into a cup and then stirred it with the stir stick. Now again, you want to go really slowly when you're using the resin, because the more you stir it around, you obviously have to stir this up, but you want to stir slowly for about 2 minutes, maybe even 2.5 minutes. The slower you stir, the less bubbles you're going to create. You want to be sure that you mix both parts evenly, so you definitely want to stir it up, but you don't want to speed as you stir, because that's just going to create bubbles, and then the more bubbles there are, the longer you have to wait for all of the bubbles to settle. So go ahead and pour your resin into your mixing container, mix it up, and then sit it to the side and let all of those bubbles rise to the top, and then it will be ready to work with. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I have picked out the bezels that I'm going to use. I'm going to make a pair of earrings using 2 of the round bezels, and then I'm going to make a necklace with this larger rune bezel. So from the image assortment, there are several to choose from. They're really, really cool. I had a hard time picking which ones I wanted to use, but I did decide on a couple of different things. I'm going to use this one that looks like handwriting. That's going to be the background for my rune bezel, and then I'm going to layer some other images on top. Now I went ahead and cut it to size so that it's going to fit inside the bezel, and I also used a black marker right around the edges just to kind of give the image an aged look. You don't have to do that part if you don't want to, but if you do, a black, a gray, or a brown marker right around the edges of your piece of paper are going to give it an old look. Okay, so just go ahead and cut out whatever pieces you want, figure out what you're going to layer into your piece. I'm going to lay my images down, and then I'm going to add some of the opals, and I do have a dried flower. I may add some pieces of dried flower to mine as well. Before I do any of that, I'm going to lay down a little bit of image sealer into my bezels. You don't have to do this part. The ice resin is perfect all by itself, so you could just take a dip of the ice resin and paint it onto the bezel and then lay your images down. It really makes no difference. I just happened to have some image sealer on hand, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm just going to go ahead and just lay a little bit of this down into the bezel, and I'm just painting it on with a paintbrush, just a really thin layer. And this is going to dry clear. You can use Mod Podge for this. There is a really an image sealer that is made by Ice Resin that you can get, but you don't have to. If you're using inkjet printer images such as photographs, I definitely would recommend using an image sealer of some variety. It works as both a glue, but it also kind of helps to seal in the image so that when you put the resin on top, the image is not going to bleed. All right, so I have that laid down, and now I'm going to come in with my image, and I'm just going to lay it down into the bezel with my fingers. right? And then I'm going to also lay the two into the round bezels as well. And you'll notice I've not taken these off of the card. You can take them off of the card if you want to, but I feel like it's safer to just work with them on the card until the resin has set up. That way, if I spill any of the resin or any of the glitters or any of the things it is that I'm using, then I don't have a big mess. It's just going to be here on the surface. This also gives you something to grab onto when you pick it up and lay it onto another surface to let it dry, so that you don't drop it accidentally. All right, so my images are down, and I'm going to go over those images with just a little bit more of the sealant. I'm going to press down on the images, and I'm also, it's making my ink run just a little bit. That's all right. I'm just putting a really thin layer over the top of the image. This is going to help glue down the next level of image. It's also going to seal in any of the ink. And I'm going to do this to the earrings as well, even though I'm only going to use this one image on the earrings. Okay, and like I said, you can skip this part if you don't have a sealer. It is not completely necessary, but if you've got it, go ahead and use it. It's better to be safe than sorry. All right, so now I'm going to let that dry for just a couple minutes. It's not going to take long for that to dry, and it's going to dry clear. Once that has set up, then I will be ready to add some resin and some more pictures. And actually, before this one dries, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to lay down a couple more images here. So I just cut out another little picture from the image assortment, and then I found this one that looks like a key. I'm going to lay that one down as well. Just kind of layering these in so that you still see the background, but the colors all really go together. The images are in the same color scheme, and they really work really well together. And I might give another a little bit of sealer here just to kind of glue those images. Really, more than anything, I'm just kind of gluing the images together more than I'm worried about sealing anything. So just a nice layer. It's very thin layer. All right, so I'm going to let that set, and then we're going to come back and add our resin. Okay, now that my image sealant has dried, and you want to be sure that it dries completely if you're going to use it. If you're not going to use any kind of sealer, like I said, you don't have to, but if you're not going to, then you can go ahead and move on to this step. So we are ready to use the resin. I don't know if you can tell or not, but a lot of the bubbles are gone. There are some very, very tiny bubbles on the inside. These are going to rise to the surface and pop, so I don't have to worry about there being any large bubbles. However, if there are large bubbles, you can go in and pop those later, or you can hit it with the low setting on a heat gun, and it will go ahead and pop those bubbles. All right, so let's move the earrings to the side for just a second, and let's work on just the pendant. Okay, so I have a paintbrush. This is not a good paintbrush. This is just one that I don't care that it gets messed up. I'm going to use the paintbrush to kind of evenly distribute the resin as I pour it into the bezel. I'm going to pour a little bit down, and then I'm going to add some of the opals, and then I might add some dried flower to this. So let's get started with that. I'm going to bring in my stir stick just to kind of help very slowly add some resin. And again, we don't need a ton of resin to start with. And then I'm just going to take my paintbrush to just kind of start spreading it around. And we will add more in a minute. We just want to get this main layer down first. And one thing you'll notice is that immediately when you pour the resin onto the images, it really brightens up the inks in the images. It really makes the image pop. Okay, so I have a thin layer of the resin ready. So now I'm going to sit my paintbrush right here so that it doesn't touch anything else. And now I'm going to open up the opal, and I'm actually going to use a pair of tweezers for this. You can use your fingers if you want to. I just find that using tweezers is a little bit easier. It kind of helps me really put these pieces where I want them to go. So I'm just going to drop a few little pieces of this here and there, and then I'm going to use the tip of my tweezers to kind of guide that around to where I want it to be so that it's not all concentrated in one area. Okay, so I just want this just a little here and there. I don't want a ton, but it's up to you. You can go crazy with the glitters or just add a little bit or a lot. It really makes the image or the images that you've picked, it really just adds an extra touch of sparkle to what is already a beautiful mix of images. All right, so just a little bit of that. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to try to lay down. I've got this dried rose. I'm going to try to lay down some pieces of the dried rose. And I'm going to start with a large piece. If it doesn't work, well, let's see. Maybe I'll just take a small piece of this. Just kind of lay it. Where do I want that to go? I'm going to use my tweezers again. Just to kind of lay this in where I want it to go. It's a little bit of glitter on it. That's okay. And then I've got a piece of the leaf. I'm going to take the leaf. I'm going to lay it down in there as well. Just adding some natural elements to the images and the glitter. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's really whatever you want to do. You can add as much or as little to the images as you want. Really, the sky is the limit because there are so many different things that you can do with resin. It's every little individual pendant or bezel turns into a little miniature work of art. And really, it's up to you what you want to add, what you want to put in. You can use photographs, you can use dried flowers, you can use herbs, you can add beads. Really, the sky is the limit. Your imagination is the limit. All right, so I have my pieces of flower down in the image, and I'm going to pour in some more of the resin just to go over the top of the opals and over the top of the pieces of flower. And then I'm going to kind of help evenly distribute it with my paintbrush again. And I'm pouring very slowly. And I don't want to overfill, so I want to go ahead and pour some in, guide it around, and then see how much I need before I pour any more in. Definitely want to be sure that I cover up all of the glitter and get into all of the corners of the bezel. Working very, very slowly so as not to create any bubbles. And I do have a couple of bubbles here. I will work on those in just a second. I just want to go ahead and add some more resin first. Really be careful not to overfill. Just pouring it in, giving it a second to let it disperse, and then giving it a little bit of a look. Looking to see if it's even. Just going really, really slow, because I don't want to create more bubbles than necessary. All right, so this is almost right up to the very edge. And just want to touch it with my paintbrush. Some of the glitter is starting, or the opal pieces rather, are starting to float. That's fine, but it also gives me an opportunity to move them. So that's also kind of an added benefit. Now, if you didn't want your pieces to move and you wanted those to stay down on the surface of your images, you would lay down that first layer of your resin and then walk away and let it dry for a few hours, and then you could come back in with another layer, and that's going to keep all of your pieces of glitter or your opal pieces all on one layer. All right, so this is looking really good. Just kind of moving everything around a little bit. And if I want to add some more glitter to this, I can. I feel like this looks pretty good though. So I'm going to stop messing with it, but I am going to come in and pop some of the bubbles because there are some large bubbles here. Let me zoom you in. I don't think you're going to be able to see them, but right up here in the top, there is a couple of bubbles. I'm just taking a piece of wire, just a scrap piece, and I'm just very gently gonna pop that bubble. And then any of the other little bubbles that I see, I'm just gonna use the very, very tip of my wire to pop the bubbles. I'm also going to push down on my pieces of flour and make sure there are not any air pockets underneath the pieces of flour that are there, because those bubbles eventually will raise to the surface, and we don't want any large bubbles to surprise us when we come back and look at this later. Okay, so I am happy with the way that that looks. I think that it looks really good. It's going to look beautiful when it dries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully lift this up. I'm going to zoom you out just a little bit. I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to sit this on a surface where I know that it's not going to be disturbed for at least 8 hours. It takes about 8 hours for this to dry. I usually leave it overnight. It'll take a good 3 days for it to completely cure. However, after 8 hours, you can go ahead and turn this into a piece of jewelry if you want to. I'm going to let mine sit overnight. I'm going to sit this to the side for just a second. We're going to work on the earrings, and then I'm going to go away, let all of this cure, and then we will come back and turn these into pieces of jewelry. All right, so I've brought in the earrings, the bezels for the earrings, and I'm going to pour in some resin. Now these are much smaller, so this is going to take much less resin. Just a little bit of resin is all it's going to take. So I've put a thin layer, and then I'm going to do a thin layer on this one. And I'm going to add some, I'm not going to add any of the flower pieces to this just because they're small and there's not a lot of room, but I am going to add some of this opal just because it is so pretty. I'm going to add that to both. This is just going to add some sparkle to that image that's underneath. Okay. I'm going to close that back, and then I'm going to pour over a little bit more of the resin. Oh, I've made just a little bit of a mess. Now, when it spills over the side like that, you can clean it off. I'll show you in just a second. You have to be extra careful with the small bezels because they will fill up before you know it. So it may make more sense to drop it in off of your stirring stick than to actually pour directly into the bezel, but it's whatever you're comfortable with. Just want to be careful that you don't spill any of it or make a mess. And unfortunately, it looks like I have made a bit of a mess on the top one, but I think we can clean it up. All right, so going to bring my paintbrush in and just kind of move everything around just a little bit. Make sure the opal pieces are where I want them to be and that there aren't any air pockets. Don't want there to be any surprises later. Once this hardens, you cannot get rid of the bubbles that are underneath the surface. So you definitely want to double check and make sure that you get all of those before you walk away from your bezels. Alright, so they're looking pretty good. This one doesn't seem to be filled nearly as full, but I think that it is. I think it's just the lighting. Okay, so I have these filled up and I did make a little bit of a mess. I'm going to come in with a Kleenex and just barely wipe the edge just to clean up what I spilled on the rim of the bezel. And it was just a tiny bit. I think that once it hardens, you probably won't even be able to see it. And there's a piece of glitter right there on the edge. I want to be sure that everything is inside the bezel and not along the edge surface. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave this alone and I'm going to let these sit. I'm going to move it with the larger bezel. I'm going to sit these to the side overnight and then we will come back tomorrow, check out the work, see how it looks, and then we're going to turn it into a piece of jewelry. Okay, so these have sat overnight. They have gotten nice and hard. You can see that they are ready to turn into jewelry. And like I said, overnight is pretty much the standard, about 8 hours. I gave mine more. I gave mine probably, it's been about 14 hours since I've been in here. So they've had time to sit and cure for a while, but they will be completely cured in 3 days. So you still want to be kind of careful with them. But for the most part, these are ready to turn into pieces of jewelry. Now you'll notice I've taken one of the earring bezels off of the card. The other one is already an earring. So we're just going to make a matching earring for this. I am going to sit this to the side for just a second though. We're going to get to the earrings after we talk about the necklace. So this is the pendant and you can see it's all nice and hard. It's ready to go. So I'm going to take it off of the card. And then before we turn this into a necklace, I do want to show you, doesn't that look pretty? I really love how this turned out. I'll zoom this in for you guys after we get done with the necklace portion of this. So I'm going to set this to the side for just a second too, because I just wanted to show you, I got a little crazy with the resin. I had a lot of resin left over and I wanted to see what I could do with it just very quickly. I layered a couple of the pieces of paper here. I cut out the word dreamer. I added some more of the little glitter to this and then filled this one up. I think this one's probably my favorite other than the large one for our project, but I think just out of the ones that I was just playing around with, this one is probably my favorite. However, the reason I'm showing this to you is because this is something definitely worth mentioning. I did not take the time to make sure that the word, that piece of paper that has the word on it, it didn't get sunk down really far and nice and flat. So I don't know, you probably can't even see it, but right there where I'm pointing, there was an air bubble. There was just a little pocket of air that was hidden that I didn't know about when I walked away. And so this morning when I came back in here to check it out, there is an empty space here where that air pocket was. So the bubble popped and then the surrounding resin had already hardened, so there wasn't any room, there wasn't any movement to fill in that space. So you just need to take things like that into consideration when you're working with resin. That's the only reason that I'm showing you this, because I just want to show you the kinds of things that can happen. It definitely hasn't ruined the piece for me, because if you're looking at it straight on, you'll never even notice it. But it's not a piece that I would sell by any means, because it does have that extra little hole there that I could probably go in with just a little bit of extra resin and fill it up. And I may do that later on. But just to show you what kinds of things can happen. So then the other two pendants that I filled in, I was just kind of playing around. They're not the most beautiful things in the whole world, but I just wanted to see what was possible. So I laid down a piece of paper, some of that, the collage paper, and then I actually took two of the Jesse James beads charms that were in one of my mini mixes, and I put those down inside the resin and then covered everything so it's nice and smooth on the outer surface. I think that turned out pretty well. I like it because you definitely can add anything to your resin. It really it's amazing, all the different things. So this one I did as well. I added some of the glitter, and then I took this wolf charm that was in one of my mini mixes and I put him underneath the resin. He's completely covered. Very, very cool. So a lot of different things that you can do with the resin. The sky is really the limit when it comes to what you can do with your resin pieces. So really it's just as far as your imagination will take you. All right, so let's go ahead and turn this one into a necklace. I love this huge pendant. I think it turned out beautifully. It looks really, really good. There are not any noticeable air bubbles, which I like. There are a couple of little tiny ones, but really you never even will notice them. So I think this turned out really, really well. So we're going to take some beads and we're going to make some beads on either side for the long portion of our necklace, and then we're going to use some leather to kind of finish off the ends. So I just want to show you where we're going. So I'm going to make another one of these. This is just a little beaded link. It's got our wrapped loops on either end, and I'm using just an assortment of Jesse James beads that I have just kind of collected over time. So I'm going to come in with a piece of 22 gauge wire, and we're going to create that wrapped loop at the bottom or at the top. It really makes no difference. Come down on your wire about 1.5 inches and bend your wire 90 degrees. And then you're going to come in with your round nose pliers and go up and over. Adjust the grip on your pliers. Come on around so that you've got a nice loop. Put that back on the pliers and switch hands. And now I'm going to wire wrap about 3 times around our long portion of the wire. And then I'll be ready to add some beads to this. So all of the beads and the findings, all of the beads and the bead caps and the spacers are all from Jesse James Beads. They are just an assortment of things that I have. I'm going to zoom you in just a tiny bit. All right, so now we have our nice wrapped loop on one end, and we're going to thread on some beads here. So let's thread on one of these metallic bicones. And then one of these rhinestone spacers that has that AB sparkle to it. That's really going to pull the glitter out of the pendant up into the rest of the necklace. And then a bead cap in antique brass, one of these large peach beads, another bead cap, our spacer, and our bicone. So now we're just going to create our wrapped loop on the other end so that we can connect this on both ends, bending the wire 90 degrees. Using the round nose pliers up and over, adjusting the grip, moving the wire around, and then I'm using another pair of chain nose pliers to wrap that wire around about 3 times, just so that it matches the other end, and then I'm going to trim off the tail. Okay, so you can see we have 2 of these little matching beaded connectors, and let's make another connector. Well, I've already got one made, and one's all I need. So I just basically did the exact same thing here. I just put some beads, or I created the wrapped loop, added some beads, and did another wrapped loop on the other end. So this one's going to go in between these 2, and we're actually going to connect these with jump rings, but the spaces in between here with the jump rings, I want to add some dangles to these as well. So I went ahead and created a few things that I want to add. So I have this little sun charm. Again, this is antique brass, so all of the brass pieces are going to match. And then I have just these little dangles here. These are all from JessieJamesBeads.com. And let's see, let's connect those. Let's go ahead and connect with a jump ring, and then we'll work on some more dangles. I'll show you guys what I did to create some of the dangles here. So I'm just opening up a jump ring, and I'm going to thread on one of our beaded loops, or our wrapped loop on the end of our beaded connector, and then the other one. And then I'm just going to go ahead and close this back. So I have this large jump ring here. I want to take advantage of the space that large jump ring is creating, and I want to hang some extra dangles from this. So let's open up a smaller jump ring. We're going to thread on our sunshine charm, and then I have two tiny little beaded connector. Well, they're not really connectors, so they only have loops on one end, so just little beaded dangles. And I'm going to thread that onto the jump ring that is there, and go ahead and close that back. So now when this is laying on your body, you have your beaded section here, but then you also have the addition of these little dangles that are coming out on the sides. All right, so let's do that again with some more. I've got another jump ring here. We're going to go ahead and connect our beads, and then we'll add some dangles, and I'll actually show you how I made the dangles. So we'll make those together, because these are a little bit different than the others. All right, so we've got, just like this space here, we have another space here where we want to put some dangles. Let's move this up here for just a second. So I've got one little beaded dangle that's already ready to go, and then I want to make two more. So let's do that together. Let's create our own little head pin, and then we'll thread on some beads. So I've got a piece of 22 gauge wire. I'm going to grab that wire right at the tip of the wire, and I'm going to turn it around the barrel of the pliers right at the tip, once all the way around, and then twice all the way around. And I want to stop as soon as I see where that wire has started. Okay, and then keeping it on the pliers, I want to bend the wire out here 90 degrees. I'm going to take it off of the pliers. I'm going to take the tail end of the wire and go back through the loops that I created. Okay, and now I'm going to come in with a pair of my nylon jaw pliers, grab that wire right up against the loops. You want those to be right up against the side of the pliers, and then I'm going to pull, and I have created a little knotted rosette, and that's going to serve as our head pin. So I'm going to thread on this little heart bead, and you can see it's going to hang really nicely on our little knotted head pin. So I'm just going to create a wrapped loop at the top, grabbing that wire, bending 90 degrees, coming in with my round nose pliers, going up and over, adjusting the grip on around, and then we're just going to wire wrap 3 times. Okay, and now we're ready to trim off the tail. So there's another one of our little dangles that's ready to go. Now I want to use one of these rhinestone spacers that I have used in some of the little beaded connectors, but I want to hang this sideways just because I really love the rhinestones that are in this. I want to add some extra sparkle in between all of my beads, so I'm going to use this a little bit differently. I'm going to take about 4 inches of my 22 gauge wire, and I'm going to run that connector, or I'm sorry, that spacer bead to the center of that piece of wire, and then I'm going to take both ends of the wire and pull them up. Okay, just like this. So I've captured this connector or I'm sorry, spacer rather. I've captured this spacer. I'm going to cross those wires so that there is a little bit of a triangle space there right above the top. I'm going to bend one of the wires 90 degrees straight up. And then the other one I'm going to bend in the other direction. Okay, so I've got one going straight up and I've got one of them coming straight out the side. And the one that is coming out the side, I want to wrap that around that straight piece coming out of the top twice. And then I'm just going to trim off the tail. Okay, so now I've captured my little spacer bead. And I'm going to thread on a really tiny bead over the top of that, just like so. And now I'm going to create a wrapped loop here as well. So I'm just grabbing the wire right over the bead, bending the wire 90 degrees. Same thing, round nose pliers are coming in, up and over, adjusting the grip, going on around. And then wrapping the tail end of the wire around the straight section of the wire. And you've created a really unique, fun little dangle using off one of your rhinestone spacers in kind of a different way. So we're not using it as a spacer, we're using it as we would any other bead. And just showing off those beautiful AB rhinestones. All right, so we have 3 cute little dangles that are ready to go. So we are going to add those to a jump ring, and then we're going to add that to this jump ring here. So I'm going to open up jump ring, and I'm going to thread on all of my little dangles. And then before I close that jump ring, I want to thread that on to the jump ring that is going between our little beaded connections here. All right, close that back. And I just want to close this jump ring again because it's got a little bit of a space there. I want to be sure I've got a nice good closure there. So now, when everything is hanging nicely, you'll see that you've got your nice row of beads, but then you have this extra little bit of sparkle and fun, little extra movement to the length of your necklace. So obviously we need an extra one of these so that we have one coming out of either side of our pendant. So let's go ahead and connect those to the pendant. So here's our pendant. It has one singular loop here. I want to connect my beaded sections to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in with a jump ring. And I'm going to open this. I'm going to thread it on here. And then I'm going to close it back because it is not going in the direction that I want. So we need to make this next loop going so that it's going to lay flat. And so to do that, we're going to have to add an extra jump ring. Now this jump ring, when I open this jump ring, I'm going to thread it onto that top jump ring on our pendant. And now I'm going to thread on each end of our beaded links. So now when I close the jump ring back, we have both of our beaded sections connected to our pendant, which is hard for you all to see all in the same shot, but you can see that everything is nice and connected here. Now what we have left is we need to work on the length portion of our necklace. So obviously this is not going to be long enough to create a necklace. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to add a touch of fabric or fiber or something softer to this look. So I took 2 pieces of suede lace. They are 24-inch pieces, and I folded them in half over a jump ring. And then I just wire wrapped over both pieces so that it's connected to the jump ring. It's 2 pieces in the length. And then at the top, I just created an overhanded knot and I looped in a jump ring. And then on the other one, I did the exact same thing, but before I closed that jump ring, I added in a lobster clasp. So I have 2 sections that are ready to add directly to our necklace. Just to kind of save time, you can use anything for this portion of the necklace if you wanted to. I wanted to use something soft, so I went with leather, but you could certainly create the length with chain here if you wanted to. It's really up to you. And you can really adjust the length of your necklace in this portion. I would make your pieces of leather longer or your pieces of chain longer, whatever you need. So this just really kind of ties everything together. I've brought that brown in. There is the brown that is in our antique brass components, all of our charms, the bead caps, and it really just kind of brings all of the colors together. So you can see, and I'll have a nice beauty shot of this for you as well so that you can see this laid out. But most importantly, I wanted to show off this beautiful pendant. So we have a few beads here, but the beads don't take over the entire necklace. It definitely features our resin pendant. All right, so setting this to the side for just a second, let's talk about the earrings. So we have our earring bezel, and the coloring on the earring bezel is just a little bit different than our rune pendant. And you can see these set up nicely. There is some collage paper behind. There is some of the opal pieces, and then some little pieces of dried rose that are in there as well. So all of the colors tie together very beautifully. Everything still matches, even though the metals are just a little bit different. Okay, so this is more of a brass, whereas this is more of an antique brass. So I wanted to bring in the antique brass more into the earrings. So this is one of the finished earrings. This is a really long dangle earring. You could certainly skip a bead section of this if you wanted to go with a shorter earring, but I really just kind of loved these Jesse James beads that have that outer surface, which I believe may be resin as well. And then they have this floral kind of fabric on the inside of the bead. I felt like that just went really well with the resin pendant that we created. All the colors work really, really well together. So this is just a simple earring. Let's go ahead and put this together. So I have already created this bottom dangle using our knotted head pin. You can see I just followed the same steps as we did on the necklace to create our little dangle, and you can see I've added a bead cap here. Now I want to create another looped section so that it's got loops on both ends. So I'm coming in with another piece of 22 gauge wire in a brass color that matches the bezel. I use my round nose pliers to go up and over. And now before I go ahead and wire wrap this, I want to go ahead and hook this to the loop on the bottom bead here so that we avoid jump rings in our earrings, because they're already pretty long, so the addition of any jump rings is just going to make them even longer. So I wanted to just go ahead and wire wrap all of our beads together. All right, so I'm grabbing that loop with my bent chain nose pliers just to hold on to it. And now I'm going to wrap around the wire about 3 times. And I'm going to trim off the tail. So now this is connected. I don't have to worry that a jump ring is going to come open or that there's going to be, it's not going to get hung on anything and come undone. Okay, so now I'm ready to add another bead. I'm going to add a bead cap to this. I'm going to add the bead and then another bead cap, just continuing with the same metals, just kind of tying everything together. You can see all the metals are in the same color scheme. So same thing. I want to create a wrapped loop on the top of this, but I want to connect it directly to the bezel. So I have bent my wire 90 degrees. Same steps, coming in with the round nose pliers, going up and over. And then I'm going to guide that wire on around. And now before I do any of the wire wrapping, I want to go ahead and connect this directly to the bezel. So I'm taking the tail end of my wire and I'm going to thread it through the loop on the bottom of the bezel and hook it through. And that's going to snap right into place. I'm going to hold that loop with my bent chain nose pliers just because I feel like I get a better grip on it that way. And then I'm just going to wire wrap about 3 times to complete the connection here. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and trim off that tail. And we've got a really nice beaded section for our earring. We've got a really cool dangle. If you wanted to shorten these up, you could skip the larger bead here in the middle, but I kind of like it. I think that it's very elegant, kind of romantic looking. All right, so the only thing that's left to do is to add an ear wire. So I'm just going to open the loop on my ear wire and thread that directly onto the top loop of our bezel and close it back. And we have 2 beautiful earrings that are custom because of the addition of our beautiful resin bezels that we created all on our own with some beautiful pieces of collage paper, some pieces of opal, and dried flowers. So this definitely creates a one-of-a-kind pair of earrings, and they work really, really well with our pendant. As you can see, even though the metals are just a tiny, tiny bit different, they still go together very, very well. It makes a really beautiful set. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. I really love using the resin. I feel like the possibilities are really endless when it comes to working with resin. I hope that we get to do some more resin projects together. I hope that I have sparked your creativity, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys make. Thanks, guys.